Cool. Thanks a bunch, and thanks Rob as well as Sean for bringing me in. Basically, I was coming in for the AES to give a talk or two there, and decided it'd be great to come upstate, have a look at the trees. It's gorgeous here, it's great. So once again, thanks for coming. I'm going to try to cram things into about a little bit over half an hour. That way people can hopefully scamper off to whatever they have next, because I think some people have stuff probably at 2 o'clock, right? Yeah, okay, I'll do what I can. Okay, so we'll get started. Like Rob said, my name's Leonard. I run the School of Video Game Audio. I've been teaching game audio off and on since 2001, and I started in the industry in about 94, so a little bit over 20 years ago. And if you want to look at my tweet stuff, it's at School Game Audio, and I'll put this whole talk online, and hopefully we'll have a video recording, and I'm also doing an audio recording. So if you go to videogameaudio.com, then you can download it, have a look at it, so don't feel like you need to take notes or anything like that. And yeah, you can share it with your friends as well. So like I was saying, my background in video games might be hard to see, but I started in '94, so I started working with the SNES. That particular platform had 8 channels of rockin', basically like sample sound. Kind of crappy compressed audio, but it worked. And so I was working on international soccer. The first game I actually did audio coding on was NBA Live 95. That was lots of fun. I did an Easter egg for that. So if you play the game and then you lose the finals, you get to go golfing. So I did the little Easter egg that allows you to go golfing. So that was fun. And then I've just sort of been working in games off and on since then, and I've worked on, NHL 11, Need for Speed, Death Junior, some hockey game stuff, and then more recently I've worked on independent stuff. So I worked on a game called Vessel, another one called Retro City Rampage, and I haven't actually updated my webpage, so I also worked on a game called SimCell, which is a game for high school students to learn about the human cell. So I'm really interested in spreading sort of the knowledge that I have about video games for people that are interested, and hopefully give you some ideas on how to improve the audio in your game. So how many people here are in the games program? Okay, so there's a good chunk. People in audio? Yeah, okay, all right. And then people in other areas, I guess it's hard for me to ask, but what would be the general consensus if somebody can shout out? Anybody? Anyone? One person? Art? Visual art. Okay, all right. Visual artists. Okay, good stuff. Cool. So mostly artists. Anybody specifically like comp sci? Okay, yeah, that's where I got started. Cool. Okay, good stuff. All right. So that's good to know. I'm going to do a little bit of comp sci stuff in this talk as well, just to give you an idea of how to integrate game audio into your own games. So this slide here is just to show you that games are a big deal. So the 24-hour sales of Grand Theft Auto, that's almost $1 billion in 24 hours. Not bad, right? Yeah, I could do with almost $1 billion. And that's compared to Jurassic World box office opening for the weekend, and that's the biggest movie yet, and that's at 200. Of course, you got a bit of pre-sales happening, more so for video games, but at the same time, that game made a lot of money, and it still made money, obviously, after those sales at the beginning, too. So we're looking at around $91 billion for video games this year versus 88 or so in film. And that's not to say that films are not making as much money as games, because there's a lot of different ways to calculate this number. So I would still say that films are bigger than games, but at the same time, games are pretty serious business. And so for GTA 5, they spent $265 million on that game. So when you're working on these games, you can imagine it can be a little bit stressful. When I was working on Need for Speed, there's times when we're having a hard time getting the audio code to run at the right frame rate, so we're actually slowing down the game. And that game had like millions of dollars behind it. I think at that point it was maybe between $15 and $20 million. So you don't really want to be the last person. Like, when the music stops, there's no chair for you, right? So you really have to make sure that everything has to work. So it's nice being in school because then you can learn about stuff and play around, but once you hit industry, it gets pretty serious pretty quickly. And then Pirates of the Caribbean, they're a bigger budget there, but still, games are quite big. So here's a short history of game audio. I don't think I'll play all of these, but here's Super Mario from 1985 for the NES. We'll see what the audio levels are at first here. Oh, that's cute. You've probably heard the song, yeah? Yeah. Okay, good. So this is by Koji Kondo. He's a Japanese composer. He's still alive, which is great. And I'm working on a film called The Beat Movie, and it's a documentary of the history of game audio and the people that worked in game audio. So we didn't actually get to interview him, but we were able to interview this other guy that's also Japanese, and he composes for the NES as well. And so this is Nobuo Uematsu. And so this is for the NES as well. And you can hear the styles are quite different, right? So when he was composing this, he was sort of thinking, how do I get this particular instrument to sound, because this is like for a fantasy game, sort of like this. So these are the same notes, it's just instrumented, like, the arrangement is for a harp, right? So when you think about game audio, sort of the quaint time of video game audio back in the day, it's not so much that they were interested in producing something that was quaint. They were really struggling to get something that sounded really musical. And so for the songs that are really successful, they've sort of withstood the test of time. And we still listen to them today. Well, at least some of us do. And so that was sort of synthesis era. And then in the 90s, we're looking at where they were using general MIDI to trigger a card that you would put into your PC. And here's Monkey Island. I'll skip the intro here. Yoink. So this one is like having basically like a synthesizer inside of your computer. And there's a lot of FM sounds, I believe, in this, so frequency modulation. There might also be samples as well, right? Okay, unfortunately I'm gonna have to cut that one down. And I would also show you Quake by 9 Inch Nails, and then most recently we've got Paul McCartney showing his chops on Halo Destiny, which is a huge game by Microsoft. So has anybody played Destiny? Anyone? Anybody a gamer? A few people? Oh, all right, cool. Most people artists. That's good. That's nice. I actually don't personally play a lot of video games, but if you're interested in the industry, especially at the beginning, it's good to sort of get an idea of what sort of come before. So there is a very sort of condensed history of game audio. All right, there we go. So for the Commodore 64, we've basically got 3 voices. This was in 1982. And so this is a computer, but it just shows that these older systems, you have to realize that the Commodore 64 had 64 kilobytes of memory, right? So that's a tiny, tiny, minuscule amount. So you can imagine you're trying to make a whole game, you're trying to add all the sounds, all the artificial intelligence, graphics, all that kind of stuff. And you don't even get 64K depending on how you run things, right? So in those days, you had to synthesize stuff from mathematics, which is, synthesis from oscillators. And the picture here it's a little bit blurry, but it's me actually carving a Commodore 64 sound chip out of a Commodore 64 that was dead. This particular one happened to be soldered right on the board, so I had to slice along the sides and then desolder it, and eventually it did work. So I am eventually going to produce some stuff for the Commodore 64, but I haven't yet. The next one here is the NES, and we've heard this before. So that was Koji Kondo as well as Nobuo Uematsu's music, and so it's got 2 pulse waves, a triangle wave, and a noise channel. So most video games for music, they would just have 4 channels, and then they would reserve that 5th channel, the limited sampled sound channel, for sound effects. Because if you didn't, then you would play sound effects and it would cut out the music, right? So on the Commodore 64, a lot of the times that would happen, okay? And I'll show you a little bit of the more details of the NES as well. So with the PlayStation 4, this is kind of where we're at now. We've got like 512 plus channels of audio. Basically anything that you can get the CPU, or like it's got a multi-core system. Usually you get one out of the 7 cores dedicated towards audio, and that's sort of typically how many channels you can run. So in this case, it's more of a problem of just having like, sonic moosh, right? So you have to figure out how to mix things properly so that things aren't, confusing and sound like a mess. But the nice thing is that you can distribute this into 7 channels surround plus the sub. So it's 7.1 HDMI audio. So just an overview here that, like film audio, game audio is made out of speech, sound effects, and music. Sometimes sound effects and music, especially for horror sort of stuff, is kind of mixed together. It's hard to tell where the line is. But unlike film audio, the audio is interactive for games and must respond to changes in gameplay, just like the graphics, right? They kind of weird if you had a game where the music changed, but then the visuals, there are games like that are just audio games. But it's good to think of that like anytime you play a linear piece of music and the gameplay is changing and not reacting to it, it sort of produces a bit of a distance between the player's level of immersion, because they know that the music's not going to change depending on what they do, so there's just not as much engagement happening there. So that's like, when I work on games, I really want to make stuff that's really going to draw you in. So, like I said, early systems were limited by RAM, so only synthesis was possible, but now, the systems we have now, there's tons of RAM, and we're all good for that. So, game audio history, starting way back in '77, this is sort of one of the earlier systems, the Atari 2600. Okay, it had a 1 megahertz processor. That's pretty small as far as the processing that you can do on that. You had 2 voices, so you could play 2 sounds at the same time. You had 16 colors. This was a game Combat from '77 that shipped with the console. And this is the whole game. It's the whole game. Graphics, if you look, well, it's kind of hard to see once again, but if you look at the bottom there's a whole bunch of zeros and stuff, and that's the graphics for when the tank rotates, right? So any spot there isn't part of the tank, then those are zeros. So it's really difficult to try and figure out how to get audio into an Atari 2600 game. So a lot of those games actually didn't have audio. They just, it was too difficult to do, all right? So that is a really good challenge. I'm not really so much up for trying to make a whole game 2 kilobytes, but it's interesting to think of that's where we've come from. So when I started, we were working with not 2 kilobytes, but 2 megabytes. That's for the graphics, it's for the sound, the AI, everything, okay? And that was for the Sega Genesis, and yeah, it's a real challenge. So when you look at the game, once again, it looks quaint. It's like, oh man, that's looks so, web or mobile at this point. And sort of that's where sort of the echoes of classic video game architecture come out, because, you want to have a fast download, or you want it to not take up the whole space on your phone, so you have a small download size, really similar to what we were doing back, basically 20 years ago. So some games that I've done music with is Death Jr. 2, Science Fair Doom, NBA Jam, Vessel, Retro City Rampage, and SimCell. And I was happy to press vinyl for Retro City Rampage. That was cool. So I hope that maybe in the future I'll do another vinyl at some point. So with Retro City, really what we wanted to do was Grand Theft Auto sort of NES style. So what we did is use a tracker, and that's sort of this program here on the right, to make the audio. So what really happens with a tracker is that you're putting in note data and then some sort of parameter data to modulate the pitch sometimes, the frequency, the playback rate, and then the volume, and sometimes be able to change the oscillators as well. But you really only had pulse wave, triangle wave, noise channel, DPCM. And I'll show you a song that I worked on that was not for Retro City, but if you use a program called Family Tracker, you can actually export the music and have it run on a real NES, which is pretty cool. So this is a remix that I did for a game, well, basically like a game music compilation called Roko-chan from Japan. Okay, so all the notes just fly past there. So instead of going left to right, your notes go up and down, they just scroll off the top. Okay, I'll just skip across here. So these are all patterns. Okay, then you can change the tempo, right? And if I mute out stuff, that's the triangle wave, right? Noise channel. And, right. So if I take everything out there, we can listen to the 2 pulse waves. Okay, now that's chirpy. So basically what I'm doing there is I'm modulating really quickly between the root and the octave. So it gives that sort of chirpy sound, right? Add this guy back in, right? There's the lead line. And every single, like modulation, you have to code in, like you type it all in, right? Cute, eh? So those little bass slides, they're all, in the triangle wave. So usually the triangle wave was used for bass. To here are sort of lead lines, and then you got the noise for sort of your percussion, all right? So that's how we sort of did music for Retro City Rampage. We used a slightly different tracker, but you can download both of those programs for free and try them out if you're interested in making NES music. So for NBA Jam, here's a little bit of whiplash. So this is what I did is I got music from this sort of composing group, and then I remixed it. So in this case, like when I would get their stems, it would be like all unbroken. So you can see I had to do a lot with certain pieces of their music. And this one here is just using FL Studio. It is a little bit glitchy and grimy, and it's got a lot of bass on it, so it might actually sort of rumble the speakers a bit here, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah. It's not so bad, actually. More bass. So you can hear there's all sorts of distortion-y type stuff in there, like glitch, record grab kind of things and all that kind of effects. So I also work with music like that too. So that was by the Vanguards. And there's one of the tracks that DJ Chemo had done is She's Dangerous. I don't know if you've heard of that. It was like a top song a while back. So anyways, it's fun working with sort of big name artists. And I did that as well with Vessel. I worked with John Hopkins. So he is a Mercury Award, Prize Award winner. And I won't show you the music here, but if you're interested, you can have a look at a YouTube video where I talk about all the details. And when I did previous talks at Rob's and Sean's classes, with Rob's class, I actually played part of the video. So anyways, it just goes into all the details of how I worked with John Hopkins' stems. So he would basically send all his working tracks, and then I would take those and then remix them down to usually about 4 layers or so. And then depending on what's happening with the game, I would actually dynamically change the mix on those, but intelligently, so that it would come in at musical spots like in where he's actually composed the music, right? So it's a pretty complicated system, and I'm really happy with the way that worked out. In that case, that was like a custom system that we put together for that game. And yeah, it took a long time to get his music, but it just shows how sometimes you can actually take music that wasn't meant to be interactive, and then depending on who you're working with, they can take their composition and then really make it so that it fits with the game. So there was definitely like a lot of dynamics where it would sort of fade down to almost nothing, and then if you had left the mix that way, the person, like the player playing the game, might think they did something wrong, when in fact they didn't. So I actually had to take material and fly it in from other parts of his song that fit in there, that sort of like evened out the whole contour. So when you solve parts of the game, like it was a puzzle-based sort of platformer, that it made you feel like, yeah, right on, I actually figured something out, the beats come in, this is great. I know what I'm doing here, right? So that was Vessel. SimCell, with this one, once again, there's a video online. There's actually a couple. One where I really discuss the sound design as well as the generative music. And there's also one when I gave a talk at Stanford that goes over a lot of the details. But I'll bring this one up quickly. In this one, I'm using Pure Data. Does anybody use Pure Data here? A couple people? Okay, all right. Yeah, right on. The people that use Pure Data, they're like in the front row. Good stuff. All right, good. Well, I have something for you. And the rest of you, of course. No. So this is it's basically, but who uses Max MSP? Yeah, okay, good stuff. Yeah, so Pure Data is kind of like the free version of Max. And it was made by Miller Puckett in the mid-90s. And because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to fast forward by putting the BPM to 0 and see if we can get through this quickly. There we go, lots of notes. There we go, Black MIDI. Okay, come on, man. Faster. Okay, all right. So here's my little mixer, and there's my lead line. Okay, and it's coming from this pattern here. This is my sequencer. Okay, and then here's sort of my chords that are a lot of, well, this is my reverberation, sorry. This is coming from a simulated plate reverb. Okay, and here's my chords. I don't think there's anything on this channel. Okay, yeah, right. So when those all get added together, it's a lot of reverb over this. I like to play it in a large room. Okay? So what it's doing is it's taking those notes and then randomly moving through those sequences to generate sort of an endless soundtrack. There's also a granulation going on there and a few other different things as well. Okay, so that's just a crash course sort of introduction to that for the music for SimCell. And then what I want to do is I want to show you how you can actually put sound effects into a game. All right, so I am, with my course, this is exactly what I teach or mentor my students to do. And so I use it's not free, but it's free for indies. So it's a middleware, a game audio middleware engine called Wwise, and it's developed up in Montreal, Canada. It's been around for a long time, and it allows you a lot of adapted music possibilities, a lot of ways of making dynamic sounds. And for those of you that are building games, the cool thing is that it's free for indies now as of the last sort of year or two. And as long as you don't have a really complicated game. So if you've got more than 200 sounds, then you're going to need to get a license, but the licensing is fairly accessible as well. So let's have a look here. Oh, I do have it open. Great. I have the wrong one open now. So let's see. I'm going to open CubeMag. Okay, actually it's opening both of these. So for those of you that don't program, this is just, it's what's called a compiler. And it allows me to change all of this information here into stuff that the computer can understand. So this might look like stuff that the computer understands directly, but it doesn't. This is a whole bunch of the defines for the different sounds that are in the game. So I've got like, music and other things in there. There's, stopping the fireball. There's like, monsters biting, all sorts of stuff. So hopefully, if I run this, build succeeded. Okay, great. So as you can see, this is a custom build that we made. I might actually get the lights on this one so they can see it a little bit better. The unfortunate thing about all these sort of, first-person shootery type, games, they tend to be a little bit dark. Okay? So, all right, and if I fire this, hopefully, turn this down just in case. Okay, so I've got that shotgun sound, right? And then we'll just pretend that we're going to change it to something else. We're just like, okay, I don't really like that shotgun sound. I'm going to, edit out a different sound, and I'm going to get something that sounds a little bit nicer, maybe a little bit more human. Sounds like this. Okay, so it's cute, huh? Yes. Acapella sound effects. And the thing is that as sound designers for video games, we often actually do this to rapidly create sounds just to hook the sounds into the game to see if they're actually working. So I'll take this sound here, And I'm gonna save, I think I already saved this one, so I think we're good there. Now what I want to do is I want to go into the, basically the middleware tool, and it'll open up all the events and stuff that I need. Okay, I'm going to have to shut down the game, because if I don't, it's actually holding what's called the sound bank, like all of the sounds, and it's locking that file, so I can't change it while it's being used for the game. It's kind of like trying to pull the rug out from underneath the game, and it doesn't like that. So if we look through here, I know it might be hard to see, but there's a shotgun there, and if we test this out, okay, there's the sound, but I want to import something else, and I'm going to add file here. There's my little pew pew sound. Okay, open, and we should be good. Import. Okay, I think that's, no, I'm serious about it. Import. So there it is, and now we should have that. Yeah, right on. Okay, good. So now I just drag and drop this over the shotgun, and I'll select it to use that instead of the old one. So now when I trigger the shotgun, okay, perfect, good. So now what we need to do is we need to generate the banks for the game. So we just do generate. And it's pretty smart about it. If it's already done to generate, it just reuses the old information and sticks it all back together again. So we should be good to go and play the game with our new amazing sound effect. Yeah, there we go. So it's got all the original sounds in there, but we've got the and you can hear there's pitch variation, right? And that's because we defined that when we were over here in our Wwise program. One of the neat things that we can do is we can connect to the game while it's running to change things. So let's see here, remote, and uh-oh, that's not good. Okay, let's just pretend that works. Usually you can connect to the game, but I think it might be because I'm running it in the compiler at this point that it's not happy with that. So, whoops, there you go. There we go, lovely live demos. Okay, perfect. So it does work, and that's sort of how you put your sounds into the game. And then you just go back and forth, tuning things, and making sure that, it all sounds good, all right? So that's using the Wwise audio engine, okay? So similar to like Pro Tools and Nuendo, there's also competitors on the game audio middleware engine front. And so this is Wwise, but we'll quit out of this one here. Okay, exit. I don't want to save my project, as beautiful as it is. Okay, and I'm going to open up another game and show you a different piece of game audio middleware. So that was Wwise, right? And then this one is Cube 2, so sort of an updated version of that particular game. They're open source, so that's why I can change them. And then this is using FMOD Studio, all right? So if I open that program instead, okay, open recent Sauerbraten, so that means meat stew in Deutsch, all right? I'm half German, but probably my pronunciation's pretty crappy. Okay, so there's our code that we have in our compiler, and then we want to run this and get the game to go. There we go, great. Okay, so I'm just going to shortcut this, and as you can see up in the top, it's a custom code that I added. So this particular one, I had to do all the game audio coding to put that stuff in there, whereas for Wwise, you can actually get that straight from their site. Okay, so similar, we've got if you look up in the top left, right, those are the game events from the game, and every time I fire it says S pistol. I'm walking around, there's footsteps, and you hear how I put there's this green area here, does a real-time effect, a delay on the music. Not a very good one, but it's just to show you that things change in real time with the game depending on where your position is as well. Okay, so that's all great. Let's disconnect and quit. And now let's have a look at this one, FMOD Studio, okay? So with this, open recent, there it is, okay, great. Hopefully it works. And so these are all the events, so it looks slightly different. Maybe it looks a little bit like Ableton Live, right? If I scroll down here, what are we looking for? S, pistol? Right, this one, right? Okay, yeah. Okay, so if we open this up, there's actually 3 samples in there. What we want to do is put our own sample in there. Import audio file. Oh gosh, where am I? Is it on the desktop? Yes. See, smart guy. Good stuff. Okay, so there it is. Pew pew. Right? Pew. Yeah, man, there it is. I should really work in game audio. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so there it is. Unfortunately, it's 1 out of the 4. So that means if I left those ones in there, it would randomly play, and only sort of a fourth of the time it would play. So to stop that from happening, I'm actually going to delete those other options out. And similar to Wwise, you can randomize the pitch as well as randomize the volume. So if we test this one out. So not a very wide pitch range, but that's okay. I think we'll be fine. And with this one, we also need to build the banks. So I go build, and it's done. It's quick. Now, when we go back to the game, we should be able to run it, and hopefully, please let this work. Academy. Right. Haha, yes, sweet. Okay, good. Yeah. All right. So that, the music's playing there, and hopefully I can connect to the game using this guy. So connect. Oh, okay, good. We're good. So now what I can do is I can actually dynamically change the mix of the game while it's running. So here's the music. See, I can mute it out. I can change the level, right? Or if I find that, I can also run a whole bunch of profiler stuff on here as well that allows you to capture the game events. And then if you want, you can play them back. So, okay, and if I switch over here, we can see that there's the sounds that are getting played. And if we scroll down, we'll stop this guy here. And let's quit out of here, disconnect, quit. So we can actually play this back and then test, it sounds exactly like the game. See, you can see the shots coming out there. So this is actually really handy to be able to have a look at what's going on with, your CPU utilization, your number of voices, the number of instances that you're running, the amount of memory, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, audio levels here. So you want to make sure that you're not making things that distort. Okay, right? So there's levels, and you can actually sort of zoom in there and see exactly what's going on at any given point in time, okay? All right, so that is how you add audio using FMOD Studio, okay? We're not gonna save that, not gonna save that, and whoo, right on, sweet, questions. That's all easy, right? No questions? Yes?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Big question. Emotion and sound mapping. Do you do that as part of your game designing? Because we were considering doing that on a project that we're working just to help us out a little bit in regards to how things are paced and what's happening.
Right. So emotion. Yeah, we do that in games all the time. Is that it's actually called? What is it called? At EA, basically, it looks like a little. It's like an emotion contour, and so you'll basically play the game, and then somebody will sort of notate it and be making this thing. It's like, and the funny thing is that I don't know for people that play games, but you might have noticed that nowadays they actually make that emotion contour. They try and make it super high. So if you watch the game in the store, like at EA, they specifically sort of push the emotion right at the beginning. So when you put the demo on, you see a whole bunch of cool stuff in the game. Whereas before it was this whole thing of you would play the game for weeks on end, and then you get to the end, and you're like, wow, right on. So the rise would have been from low to high over days and days. Whereas now it's just super spiky. And I think it also sort of models the way that the frequency of video cuts are happening. Just the visual density that we're used to these days, I think has gone way up from 20 years ago and stuff. So yes, we do stuff with emotion like that. Usually it's just intensity, but I mean, they actually do a lot of tricky stuff with they actually bring in experts and things like that too. So say for the FIFA game, they'll actually bring in like linguists to find out if the way that they're automatically generating like the dialogue for the game makes sense. So they'll actually have somebody do like, you know, whatever, PhDs, whoever it is, doctors come in and listen to the game, and then they'll sort of do it in a sense like a Turing kind of test, where they'll just go like, if this was a real person, you know, doing it, does this sort of make sense? And so they'll actually do a lot of, you know, a lot of focus group stuff too, as well, to sort of work that stuff out. So yeah, it depends which game you work on, but yeah, it is really important.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. Yes?
How do you do some of the more advanced things, like for example, orchestral pieces and like say the background scale?
Yeah, well, it's done exactly the same way. I mean, if you're, like say with the NBA Jam example that I showed with all the tracks, instead of those being electronic tracks, those would just be orchestral stems. So as far as transitioning, usually you're not going to be, like at this point, you're not generating, like you're not triggering real-time, like not synthesizers, but you're not triggering real-time samplers usually. Often that stuff is all flattened out for the games. But at this point, you're almost at the point of being able to like export, like say your Nuendo session where you've actually put together your orchestral mix and then put that into the game and then dynamically change that in the game. It's pretty close, because like with the PlayStation 4, etc., you know, you've got a lot of processing. So yeah, it's basically sort of like what content are you using? And yeah, I mean, if it's orchestral stuff, then usually you just have to be a little bit careful with the way that the reverbs and stuff go. And you have to be natural with not jumping into things so that it sounds like an instrument's getting cut off. So, yeah. Yes?
In certain games where the sound is directly affecting gameplay, such as like enemies detecting visible audio in a stealth game or something like that,
Right.
where it affects your player actions, to what degree would you be working with the programmers or designers to make sure that the flow between audio and gameplay is coherent?
Yeah, the reason why I'm smiling is that the weird thing is that it often is almost your job as like an audio person to actually chase that person down a lot of the time. So if you think that that is going to somehow change once you finish university, it doesn't. It's this weird thing. It's kind of like audio is always last, you know, dollar short, day late, all that kind of stuff. And everybody's stressed out, and you've got like millions of dollars like riding on it. So when working with a stealth game, yeah, the important thing is that you actually develop a relationship with that particular person or that team. When I was working on, I have a lot of stories, but I'll keep it short. So when I was working on Death Jr., I actually made pretty good friends with one of the animators. And so, you know, like you go to lunch with these people and stuff, and then often that sort of like, you know, collision time that happens where you're at lunch or you just happen to be coming into the office and they're like, hey, how's it going? Oh, just so you know, like the opening sequence now has an extra 30 seconds added to it. You might want to add audio to that. Or, no, really, it happens all the time. So it's the same with working and tuning with, like, say if you're working on a stealth game, you actually really want to almost like in a sense like collaborate like and sit down with that person physically and play the game. And then a lot of the times if you're open and you're an easy person to talk to, then they'll actually put like hooks and stuff, like, you know, programming hooks in there for you to hang your audio off of, where it's like, say with stealth and just with video games in general, one of the really difficult things is anticipation, right? You can do that in a movie, no problem, but in a video game, it's really difficult because you literally don't know what's going to happen next unless you like sort of shove the person through a particular interaction, right? Which will take them out of the immersion as well. So yeah, the short answer would be is that if you want to have like your audio sound good with the physics or good with the AI, then make friends with those people specifically. And don't rely on like the company to actually, you know, say like, oh no, the physics needs to do this, and then it just won't happen. You actually really have to bridge that gap, and it's sort of usually the role of audio to do that. Yeah. Questions? Yes?
Do you do any audio for augmented reality? Because we found in some of our testing with augmented reality that without audio, bringing one from the physical into the
Yeah.
Just wondering if you were doing that.
No, I haven't, but Julia, her last name is Orland. She is an audio director at Sony in the UK, and she had talked about working with augmented reality games. What she was talking about a lot is creating like a conceptual space that all the audio sits in, and that's not necessarily like a totally different concept than what we're used to, but that is sort of like where you really want to pull the person in. And like the interesting thing about audio is that it's a perceptual or a perceived space rather than a physical space. So I think that audio is a great way of doing that, and it brings you in an emotional way a lot better than anything would visually, really. So music is really great for that, and creating some sort of like an oral shift where the person knows that they're in that new space. It's kind of like with augmented reality, like you said, it's sort of this interesting sort of third-ish kind of wall where you're permeating that, but sort of sitting on that as well. So I think audio is a great way of doing that, but I haven't worked with anything
I'm
specifically.
sorry, what was the name of that?
Her last name is Orland, and she's actually, she's Canadian, she's from Toronto. I think her first name, it starts with a J, so Joanna, I believe.
Okay.
I met her. I'm horrible with names. I'm a teacher, and like names stream over me like the ocean. It's just like,
understand that really well.
yeah. So yes. Other questions? We're at 1:51 right now, just so in case people need to leave. But yes.
How much crossover are you seeing these days between the world of game audio and other audio worlds, sound and music spheres?
Well, that was sort of like with the slide of just showing like with film, it's massive. That's part of the reason why I do my school, is because I have a lot of people that have 10, 15 years of experience in film, sometimes in theater, live audio, and then they want to move into games because it basically just broadens your horizons as far as the possibilities of making money, because audio is kind of, as one might know, it's kind of hard to survive with just doing one thing these days. So there is a lot of, people move between those domains a lot, I think. Primarily just because of the money. The money that you can make from games and film is pretty much equal now. So yeah, the people that are doing that, they move between those areas a lot. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Yes? No? Oh, yes.
Do background music and sound effects get prioritized differently when you're making a game?
Yeah, definitely. It all comes I didn't show it to you, but doing adaptive mixing, where you have the game sort of intelligently mix the sound levels that are coming out of the game engine, it's very complicated. Because really, when you have a human like mixing a film, they're listening to all the different elements, and then they're figuring out which audio elements do I want the listener to focus on, and then what's sort of wrapped up in that is like what audio is the most important, or what means the most to the person at this time, like the player. So yeah, we're always changing background level stuff. A lot of the times if there's dialogue tends to be where you have to be able to hear it, so then we duck out everything else. Sometimes it's just a volume shift. Sometimes we're actually doing, like an EQ, like notching out the place where the audio will sit so that we can hear everything else. Sometimes you can get lucky and you can actually talk to the game team and you're like, hey, I want to have this explosion like ring out a little bit before you like cut to the next scene, right? So you can actually make it where you're changing the visuals dependent on the sound too. So there's a lot of possibilities and interactions between the different layers, be it like, the sound effects, the background music, the dialogue, all that kind of stuff. The idea is that you don't want to overwhelm the player at any point where they're just looking at us like, I don't know what I'm supposed to focus on. So that is a huge part, is the adaptive mixing part. I didn't go into any details at all here. Yeah. Okay, all right, so we've got 5 more minutes, and then this way, so you're not running and slipping and stuff in the rain, I'll cut it off here. And if you want to contact me, there's my website, there's my Twitter, but also my email's on there too. If you have more time, you can come up and chat. I have stickers. Little stickers. So thanks a bunch. Thanks so much.